Hello and welcome back to Scale War Machines and the second part in this Barn Find Mustang series. In this episode we'll be doing more damage and rusting of the body shell, as well as adding some customised features. I continue where I left off by spraying some grey primer. This was done using my Badger Chrome airbrush. As explained in part 1, this is the Agora Models 1/8 scale Super Snake version of the Mustang. I then use this reference from Life Colour from their Rust and Dust diorama set because I find it's a good match for red primer or red oxide primer. I applied plenty of that around the wheel arch to replicate repairs that had been done. I then picked out other components on the body shell, and of course it was relatively easy to clean up as this is a metal model, using some airbrush cleaner and a cotton bud or Q-tip. To try and get those sort of faded layers of paint down to primer, I then used other references in the Life Colour set, including this one, which was a sort of dark base rust. Before moving on to a more orangey tone from the set to create a sort of graduation or variation in the burnt rust effect on the side of the rear quarter. And I sprayed that carefully using my Iwata Eclipse. I then very loosely sprayed some of the damage I'd done using the mini drill, and that was sprayed with the dark brown and then rubbed off, and the result was it kind of remained in the crevices and damaged areas that were created using the mini drill. Next, I sealed the whole model using Johnson's Klear, which is basically just an acrylic floor polish, and it's really good for sealing in paint layers, functioning a bit like a varnish. This time using my Badger Extreme Patriot airbrush. Now, I mentioned earlier that this was made out of metal, and the metal is extremely tough, so I wanted to create a bit more damage and dents around the bodywork. A hammer didn't cut it, so I found myself resorting quite quickly to the mini drill again with little burrs and sanding attachments. Using that I was able to inflict a fair bit of damage, and that allowed me just to spray on a sort of key coat of Chaos Black from Games Workshop, and then the areas that had been damaged were given a very liberal coat of Mr. Surfacer. I then decided I needed to level up a bit and reached for the angle grinder, and using my angle grinder I damaged quite a bit of the other rear quarter of the Mustang, and here again it needed to be sealed, this time with Mr. Surfacer 500. This is progress so far, and at this stage I designed a contraption to make handling the model a lot easier, and it was just a sort of elevating platform off eBay attached to a rotating base, and that made it a lot easier to handle the body shell. I then went back to some of the rust work I'd done right at the beginning of the film and just touched in any areas, because of course this is metal. What happens is the paint, even with a coat of clear, tends to get damaged, so you have to constantly go around and touch it up, but that adds to the whole effect. Bit of masking and respraying of those components, and then it was time for the other fender to have a similar sort of darkened rusty brown, the kind of effect that would happen if a vehicle had been left out in the sun and bleached and oxidized and then bleached again. Those are just the same references from the Life Colour set. A bit more of that primer-like, red oxide primer-like shade. And then I reached for an interesting set that I featured on the channel before called Scenic Rust by Deluxe Materials. This creates real genuine rust using little metal particles that then oxidize. So you use a rust binder, if you like, which is basically a glue, to mix it all together. You mix that with a fine metal sort of powder, and then it's a case of just applying it by brush. Just took away some of the excess glue there, and just kind of splodge it all around the model. Just dab it on, apply it wherever you think that some surface rust should appear. Obviously the application of rust on this model is somewhat fanciful. doesn't necessarily adhere to any kind of common sense, but it's just a bit of fun and artistic license with this body shell to make something different, and hopefully very spectacular at the end when it receives a lot of different effects. I worked my way around therefore, just kind of looking at door sills and areas that would get naturally rusty. Also applied little tiny specks. As you can see, I applied it to the neat paint at times as well. So what you do is work your way around attaching the rust, which of course will give 3D relief, surface detail. And here you can see it beginning to react. Now, the way you get it to properly react is you use the rust developer. This accelerates the whole process and you apply it. One coat is generally not enough, you need to do a couple of applications. And it starts to turn the metal powder into rust. The more applications you give it, the more rusty it becomes. So I dabbed that on all around the areas of previously applied Scenic rust. To feather in that brown a bit more on the rear quarters, I used the Mottled gauze technique, this time with the same grey primer, to replicate again different layers of paint on the vehicle that had been corroded and faded through. That gives a nice mottled effect, as you can see there. Now, to add a bit of colour and variety, I use these references from Zero Paints. I've put the references on screen, but there's a Mustang one and an Aston Martin one. These are great paints. I really enjoyed using these for the first time, and I decided to spray the doors in green, as if they'd been salvaged from another vehicle. I started off with that reference, the Mustang colour. And with one of the doors I wanted it to be especially damaged, so I kind of let the sort of white shine through and just applied a wet coat of the first reference and then misted over with the second Aston Martin reference, which kind of made it a bit more faded. That was the intention anyway. The other door was a bit cleaner and had a much neater coat. That's how they look, and at this stage I really wanted to create peeling lacquer. This is something I've got on my own car, and I wanted to replicate it on this vintage car as well. So I used a Wilder masking product, a liquid mask, applied it and then sprayed around the edges with this life colour liquid pigment reference to create a kind of illusion of thinned lacquer or fading lacquer. I also dusted it around other parts on the other door that was going to be less lacquer peely. Then I reached for the Zero Paints Clear Coat Lacquer and just sprayed the doors in their final lacquer coat. I accelerated drying with a heat gun. I'm not sure if that's advised, but it seemed to work quite well. And they're definitely high quality paints that spray on really well with the lacquer. Then I picked away at all that Wilder liquid mask, and I was quite pleased with the result. It gave a look that was very similar to what I can see on my own vintage vehicle. And it looked really realistic, so I was pleased with that. I then wanted to personalise the doors a bit more. In my mind, this is a kind of replica possibly of the Super Snake that's been used in races, so I wanted to create some race numbers, and I used Ultramask by Artool and a compass cutter to create circular masks. I also bought some of these automotive markings on eBay, and those are just vinyl type stickers, and my plan was to have a few of these around the vehicle as well as the race numbers. So I tested out a few different layouts. I then chose a font I liked and printed it up. I attached it to the Ultramask using double-sided sticky tape, and then with an ultra-sharp scalpel I carefully cut out the numbers. You just have to go really slow, but what you end up with is individual numbers created using the masking product, the Ultramask, and they'll be adhesive and can be stuck down. So on the lacquer peel door, I used the circular template I've made and applied it. It's a little bit fiddly, it requires a bit of kind of careful attaching. But it is a great product and I really like this. Is the first time I've used this and I really liked using it. A bit of heavy chipping by AK Interactive was applied, as you'll see later, possibly a bit too much, although I'm not that upset at how it came out. That will of course allow whatever I paint on top to be heavily chipped using water. I applied a sort of faded black from the Black Rubber and Company set and then some of their gloss black to create the base black shade. As you can see, there was a bit of bleed, but it's not really a problem. All of that will be addressed later. The same mask was applied on the other door as well, trying to get roughly the same position, although I wasn't that bothered because it adds to the sort of nature of this car as being cobbled together as some sort of stock car race vehicle. Any bits of bleeding paint were easily removed, and then I attached the numbers on top. Those were those numbers I'd carefully cut out earlier. I tried to get as good a coverage as I could, as good a seal as possible with the Ultramask. Then, because I wanted a thin border, using the compass cutter I made a smaller diameter circle, which I carefully attached. This gave a small sort of border, which was what I was looking for. Then it was just a case of using Life Colour Gloss White and spraying it over the top. Again, I would always expect some bleeding paint with this, so there will be touching up afterwards, but it wasn't too bad. However, you can see that the heavy chipping caused some of the paint just to peel away right away. Which is fine because I wanted a weathered look. There on the black it really peeled it away, but as you'll see later on I think it came out alright. So a bit of careful cleanup. And flatten down with a wide flat brush. And also that layer of paint just needs to be sort of damaged a bit more. But I got a really nice sort of chipped and damaged paint effect. I could then seal that with Klear. And that's how it looks. So I was quite pleased with the combination of the peeling lacquer and sort of damaged numbers. On the other door, as that seemed to be in slightly better shape, I didn't use any heavy chipping and just followed the same method, used the same numbers, and this is how it came out. I could of course clean any overspray quite easily over the metal using just thinners. The bonnet or hood got the same number, and again I damaged and degraded that. Thanks to people who pointed out that the actual Super Snake had fiberglass components, so my plan for the bonnet and front wings will have to be changed, and that will be an interesting weathering challenge for next time. So anyway, there we go, quite heavily damaged on the bonnet or hood, and here you can see the effect, and it's starting to look like quite a good jalopy or stock car. Anyway, hope you enjoy it and see you next time.
Subscribe for our latest videos.